Welcome back to another episode of the Planet Elevate AI podcast, where we spotlight the thinkers, innovators, and leaders shaping our AI-powered future. I'm your host, Imran Kadri, and today we are diving deep into the world of project-based learning, collaboration, and AI in education. My guest today is someone who has spent more than 20 years transforming education through technology. She's an instructional technology expert, a former K-12 computer science teacher, and the visionary founder behind Project Pals, a groundbreaking platform enabling teachers and students to design, manage, and collaborate on real classroom projects in real time. Her background spans educational technology leadership, psychology, practical engineering, robotics, instructional design, and school-wide technology transformation. She's built after-school robotics clubs, implemented tech integration plans, and created teacher resources that empower schools to bring project-based learning to life. I'm honored to welcome Miriam Bogler to the show. Miriam, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for including me in your podcast.
It's great to have you today. Before we get into the conversation, Miriam, could you introduce yourself in your own words and tell our listeners about your journey that led you to founding Project Pals?
Yeah. So again, my name is Miriam Bogler, and I am, I have been in education for more than 2 decades, and I maybe a little bit about my educational background. I have a master's degree in educational technology leadership from George Washington University. I have taught, as I was introduced, I have taught classes in computer science, all grade levels from first grade through 12th grade. And at a certain point, in my career as a computer teacher, which I must maybe emphasize that we focused a lot on project-based learning. Students would come to my computer lab to work on projects. So I have extensive experience in project-based learning, and I actually really loved it. And I really believe that that's at the time I believed that that was the future, and I still believe that it is, especially now with. At a certain point, I decided that it would be really nice if students had a platform where they can collaborate on projects in real time. Now, the reason for that was not just, a decision on a whim, but it actually was because due to my experience as a computer teacher, I noticed that students were really struggling with problem solving. A lot of most of the approach toward projects in general was that students would just interpret it as if I learned something and I need to do a project about it, all I need to do actually is to do a summary and a summary about it and maybe add a few images, and that's my project. And really, that's so far from the truth, because that's a completely different type of concept doing project-based learning. It actually starts from a question or an investigation that they have to perform. And that was not understood. And I don't think that it is really understood even today. I was very surprised that when I did some research, that only 1% of schools in the United States have implemented authentic project-based learning, meaning authentic that they did it right, exactly how it should be done. Only 1% of schools have implemented project-based learning that way. That was a big shock for me, but I knew that it wasn't a big number, but that was a really big shock. Now, so as I said, I wanted to create, sorry, I wanted to create Project Pals, and started working on it, started designing it and working on it. And in 2018, we launched. And we got, schools signing up in the United States. I must say that the fact that I just told you about 1% implementing it in the United States was really going against us. Because if you look at schools in the United States, if you look at their websites, they all say that they are implementing project-based learning, but that's far from the truth. Probably maybe it's between that summary that I told you about, that they think that the summary of a topic is really a project, and between the authentic, probably in between, they are ranging in terms of implementation. And a lot of the teachers, and again, this is not the teacher's fault. I don't know whose fault it is, but when we tried to introduce Project Pals to schools, we got very little time to train them. Usually it's either in the beginning of the year, they gave us maybe a few hours, and that was it. And sometimes even just 1 hour. We have 1 hour to introduce our application, and that is all. Now, that wouldn't have been a problem for our tool because it was very user-friendly. But the big problem was that a lot of the teachers didn't know how to implement project-based learning in itself is something that they need to learn how to implement. Not my software, but project-based learning. And many of them didn't just know what it is, didn't know how to manage groups, how to do all the things that are involved. They are not project managers. Teachers are not project managers. And that was lacking big time. So adoption in the US was very small, and even schools that really they were willing to try it out, covered very fast that their teachers didn't really understand how to work on how to do that. Our big break came actually from India, where a school in New Delhi, a quite prominent school, during the pandemic thought that e-learning would be the future of education. And they also were great believers in project-based learning. And so, as I said, our big break came from India, and that it was a school in New Delhi. And during the pandemic, they really believed in project-based learning, and they thought that e-learning is the future of education. The only problem they had was that in India, the Department of Education really dictates the curriculum very tightly. And so there was no space during the day for implementing project-based learning. So they said, well, we'll do it after school. And now a lot of parents are signing up their kids because schools are closed. They're signing up their kids to after-school classes, and we believe that this is the future, and so on and so forth. So we really were actually in negotiations with them for a whole year about all kinds of things about it. And they conditioned the implementation by doing a pilot for the entire school. And since their school was, K through 12, then they did it for all grade levels. And it was a huge success. Now, let me tell you the big difference between what happened in the United States versus what happened in India. In the United States, not only, as I told you before, not only they did not have enough time, the teacher did not have enough time to train, and they had no background knowledge in project-based learning. But the teachers also didn't have time to work one-on-one with their students. As I said, project-based learning requires teachers to work constantly with the students, and many times these teachers didn't have the time. I mean, they had millions of things to do. And so the content, and that has nothing to do with our application, the content, whatever they produced, was very low level. And I was shocked because I saw the projects and I was really shocked from the level. And then when this pilot was done in India, these teachers were working with their students all the time. And the content was amazing, just incredible. I was completely flabbergasted. I said, oh my God, this is unbelievable. Finally, I saw the value of my application, because until then I was really discouraged. And so throughout this negotiation, as time passed, the pandemic ended and the schools opened up, and they realized that there probably is not going to be any more future for an after school, because the parents did not sign up their kids anymore after school. But they didn't give up on us. They said, well, we'll try to implement it during the school time. But the only problem is the Department of Education limits the amount that they can pay for software, and especially now during the pandemic, and that can be no more than $1 per student per year. We just had no choice but to close the application. So at present, I decided that, well, of course, it was very sad for us to close the company. That was 3 years ago. We didn't actually close the company. We closed the application, the SaaS application. And I decided that my expertise in project-based learning should not go to waste, and that I should really use the company and the website for providing resources, lesson plans, ebooks, and so on about project-based learning. So that was in the beginning. And then when AI came out, I delved deeply into AI and looked into all the aspects of, how can we use AI? Because of course I read about the problems that teachers were bringing up and started looking into how AI can be used in a way that students will keep learning and not students will keep cheating. That's my focus today. My focus today is on project-based learning and on AI in education. And I think that more than ever, project-based learning is important now in the age of AI. I mean, it was always important.
How do you see AI enhancing project-based learning, particularly in real-time collaboration, which is something that you emphasized at the beginning, research and student assessment?
Okay, project-based learning, um, let's put it this way. I don't know if I mean, AI can enhance project-based learning for sure, but project-based learning in itself is probably the solution for the age of AI. And why? What do I mean by that? You know, if you are a traditional teacher, most likely you are posing questions to your students, and your students have to answer them. Now, in the age of AI, to answer questions, you know, if a student sits at home with the computer and just types in the question for ChatGPT, the ChatGPT will immediately respond. All they have to do is copy and paste, and that's the end of the story. But, you know, if a teacher continues to use this method, this method is not going to work. So, however, project-based learning is a method by which students have to do investigations about specific topics. Now, that investigation, of course, they can be helped by AI by, you know, giving them resources for their project or by providing them with outlines for something or even some summaries of resources. The issue with project-based learning is that you are investigating something and you're trying to find a solution for a problem, and you have to come up with iterations and make it even better so that finally you can actually, you know, say that your final solution, that's, you know, that was after you checked and you iterated and you made sure that this is really the best solution you can come up with. And that's something that AI cannot give you. It can maybe advise you, but it cannot give you, it cannot make the decisions for you, cannot iterate for you, cannot collaborate with your team, cannot plan and manage the project. Advice, but that's it. So really, I think that if a teacher looks to implement meaningful learning these days with AI, in the age of AI, they just have to do it, have to shift to project-based learning immediately. That's my opinion. Now, AI has definitely a role, even in project-based learning, as I said before. And I am a great believer in the Socratic method and in using AI using that Socratic method. Now, what do I mean by that? You know, one of the biggest things in AI is creating those prompts, creating big prompts that basically tell AI what it can and cannot do. And I have created a lot. I mean, I actually went through a lot of methods of learning, like, you know, writing an essay or writing or even creating a team chart or even uh, you know, writing a book report or all these things. I have created prompts where if students are using them, they are actually, it doesn't allow AI to actually give them answers. All AI is producing is constant questions, repeated questions that reflect what the student is responding, but doesn't give him answers. So the student responds something, so AI will say, well, did you look at this angle? Or did you test that, try that one? And so on and so forth. So, you know, the more I was checking these prompts, I came to the conclusion that this is actually the learning assistant that most students don't have. You know, when you look at schools, especially in the United States, most teachers don't have teaching assistants. So students get just lost, you know, after a while, if the teacher doesn't have time to dedicate to every single student in the class, and many of them get lost, you know. And so this type of method, using these type of prompts that clearly define, and I'm really defining in these prompts, whenever I create these prompts, I always say, by no means you can give answers to students. All you can do is just pose questions and, you know, and kind of lead them to the next step. So which they will arrive, you know, at, but you should never provide answers. And I'm always testing my prompts, and I must say that it never fails. It always tells you, no, I cannot give you answers, even if you try. So there are ways to actually use AI in a way that will not just provide students with help, with that assistant that they never had, but actually will engage them even more than they have been ever before and develop critical thinking. This is, by the way, the critical thinking is another thing that I was really dealing with, because I'm reading all kinds of education publications, and most of them, the subject or titles of articles that I'm reading are, teachers are concerned that AI is going to take away critical thinking from my kids and so on. And, I have a newsletter in Substack, which is called Master AI for Teaching Success. And one of my entries, one of my posts there was that you cannot take away something they never had, at least in the United States. I don't know how it is in Britain, but in the United States, and I actually did research about that, whether I'm right that critical thinking was not the strong suit of American education, and I was right in most cases. So how can you take away something they never had before AI? But for sure, if you implement this type of method, then there is a good chance that these students are going to develop that critical thinking, because by these repeated questions, that makes them think, which they don't have a chance to do these days with traditional education.
Sure, it plants ideas and perspectives into their head that perhaps they have not thought about. Great response there, because you've talked about maybe AI playing a facilitation role,
Yeah,
and not really AI giving all the answers to the assessment or to the questions or
that's right.
to the problem. And this is fantastic to hear from you. Now, you mentioned about teachers, you mentioned about head of departments being very time poor, being flooded with obviously with workloads and having a short space of time to facilitate. What key problems do you think AI could solve for teachers in consideration to project-based learning?
So I'm talking about the American education
Sure,
system,
of
because I'm
course.
not familiar with anything else.
There are similarities, by the way, Miriam. So with project-based learning, we have a lot of similar assessments,
Yeah.
types of learning that takes place here in the UK, and I'm sure across the world as well. So I think what you talk about in USA is highly relevant across the world.
Yeah. So in project-based learning, I remember project-based learning already exists more than, I think, 50 years, if not more. And in that time, which I was following project-based learning all the time, in that time, I don't think that there was a lot of willingness by teachers to implement project-based learning. But when it came to actual implementation, and when they stumbled on problems, they just gave in. They decided not to continue. And I completely understand it. That's why you see many of those websites or schools that say, oh, we use project-based learning. But when you go to the school and you really check it out, they think that they do project-based learning, but that's not project-based learning. Like, for example, if the kids build something, that's great. Okay, so they build something, but they are not really, while building, they might solve some problems, but it's not really an investigative process. It can be even building something with instructions or something like that. So I think that there was a confusion about what it is really, whether it's building something or what is it exactly, or doing a summary about the topic. But once they were introduced to the real thing, to what it really is, I think that they were stumbling. And there were good reasons for that. One of them was, as I said before, they are not project managers. And this is one of the most important things, is managing teams, managing collaboration. There were so many problems in that. A lot of teachers didn't know how to solve collaboration issues. When students are saying, well, I am doing most of the work and the rest of the team that doesn't care, or things like that. When they stumbled upon these things, then the project suddenly became the less important thing. And the most important was, how do we resolve these issues first? With the students. So that what happens with AI, when AI is in the picture, is that AI can actually become that helper or that project manager. AI here serves the process. It doesn't serve the content or the knowledge. So in other words, it doesn't give you the response. And again, it could, it could, but if you design your lectures in a way that AIs use these prompts, or you tell AI that it should never provide any answer, but it should be a guide, AI can definitely help out. And I have built a whole process of project-based learning. I have built prompts that a teacher can take, and a teacher can actually use it in the class. And AI takes over the whole project management process and guides the students in a Socratic method to come up with their own solutions to the problem that they are trying to solve. And so it's amazingly powerful in that way. But if you don't know how to use it the right way, then yes, then you will have a lot of complaints about it. And you will say, no, I don't want to use it. The students are cheating. And there's another thing here. You can always say, well, okay, but how can I control how the students, what the students are doing at home? You can't. But what you can do is you can introduce AI in the classroom in a way that explains to students how important it is to actually use AI the right way, to not use it to cheat, but to explain, to explain to students that basically it actually hurts their own future if they are going to just use it to replace them. I have a whole, as I said, I'm building a course in teaching to teachers. And this is really focusing on how to introduce AI to students in a way where they become conscious about using it the right way and not using it to cheat.
Excellent. I think that leads us nicely to my next question, which was about, with your experience of building learning systems like Project Pulse, what guardrails or ethical considerations should EdTech providers prioritize when integrating AI into K-12 environments or other learning environments?
So, one of the things that I like when I'm training teachers, and actually that was my latest newsletter that I published, was that when teachers are introduced to AI, many times the training starts with what is a computer, or what is AI, or just general studies about AI, what AI is. Halfway through the course, teachers get turned off, I believe, because they start thinking, what has that to do with what I need to introduce every day to my students? And they get lost. They give up. They say, you know what? I don't want to deal with it. And they are completely right. And instead of introducing AI as part of what they need to teach, so embedding it into really every single thing that they are teaching. And by embedding it, they also have the chance now to point out different things about AI, including how they shouldn't ever use personal information for anything. So if you query, AI for something, never say, Johnny has a problem with writing or something like that, but you say a struggling student has a problem. But you do it while you're introducing what you need to teach. That lowers the teacher's resistance to introduce AI or to even deal with AI in the classroom, and suddenly she can point, as she's teaching, she can point out all kinds of things, including things that relate to ethics of how to use AI the right way, and ethics also of explaining to students that why they should not use it for cheating, and why it can be very beneficial for them to use it, but to use it the right way, to use it as an assistant, as a coach, So all these things can be put into the regular curriculum and implementing that AI into it.
Okay, great perspectives there. Thank you, Miriam. Looking ahead into the future, how do you envision AI transforming the way students design, collaborate on, and present classroom projects over the next 5 to 10 years?
So I already mentioned a few things that, whatever I'm telling you, I'm trying to search for teachers who are really doing it that way. And just by reading, maybe there are, I'm sure there are, but just by reading about it, I didn't find many who do that. And really what I read is that the biggest problem that teachers have with AI is that cheating. And number two, that students are going to lose critical thinking. and stuff like that. Now, just by itself, the whole idea of using AI for the process and not using it for the content, and using prompts to that students can use, like not just small prompts, but prompts that take them through the whole process of something, like a project-based learning project, is something that looks to me like something that's going to happen in the future. And I don't know how future, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, but that's what I envision. I envision that because what's happening is, a lot, as I said before, a lot of teachers are blaming AI for really completely transforming education, maybe not in a good way, but in a bad way. And I'm saying this, maybe the world would have been a better place without AI. I'm guessing. But we have AI and we cannot go back. We are not going back here. Okay. So it's much better to see how we can use AI in a way that's not going to help students cheat, but it's going to help them actually develop critical thinking and be part of the world in the future, the way the world is going, be part of it. You cannot just disregard in schools AI and say, well, I'm not going to teach it because my students are going to cheat, when the world is moving ahead outside, the workplace is moving ahead with AI. I
Absolutely.
mean, you can't do that. So you have to think, how can I do it in a proactive way, in a way that is going to help them?
And I guess having a positive outlook, embracing the value of having AI and using it as an enabler rather than a blocker. Great perspective there. Thank you, Miriam. So the next part of the podcast, of course, it's more business related. EdTech companies often face challenges in reaching educators. How can AI help platforms like Project Pals personalize outreach, marketing, and onboarding for schools and districts?
How can AI help them?
Yes.
Well, I'm sure that there are more. Again, I am not a marketing expert, so I'm the wrong person to ask about that for sure. And since I'm really sharply focused on AI and education, I don't know how, what to do. I can only tell you that my son is in marketing, so he's taking care of most of my marketing needs in that sense. I'm sure there is. I'm sure there are, many ways to do that, but many softwares and, whatever social media that you can do that. And AI, as far as I heard from my son, AI can actually automate that whole process of posting regularly on social media and things like that.
That's okay. The quickfire fun wrap session is here. So, Miriam, if you had an AI assistant that could take over one repetitive task in daily life, what would you choose?
Repetitive task in daily life. Well, maybe I should play a teacher instead of me. And one of the things that really impressed me is the ability for AI to produce materials in different levels, the differentiation. Differentiation, I think, is a game changer. Even today, even without having too much knowledge about AI, a teacher can immediately benefit from differentiation. I know that there are students in the class that are different levels. And, many times you lose those that are more advanced, or you lose those that are not advanced at all, that are really struggling. And just by producing material that fits each level, a teacher can solve so many problems. So, and it's easy to even prompt ChatGPT or any AI tool and say, what, please produce. I have in class, 5 students that are struggling and 10 students that are in normal level and maybe 5 more that are advanced. And can you please produce me material for all these levels? And immediately that's all you need. You just need to introduce what you have and what topic you want to cover. And immediately it produces for you material for all those levels. And you immediately solve a big headache. And I think that's a big thing that, teachers can immediately use without even having too much knowledge about AI.
Okay, what's one childhood project or hobby that still inspires your creativity today?
Childhood project. So, well, as I said, I'm really fascinated with project-based learning, so that's definitely engaged my creativity for many years. But I like to look at it from different perspectives. I like to look at it, for example, if you have a project about a political situation, I like to produce maybe a simulation of a conversation between peoples in the past. Now AI can give us that chance, which we didn't have before, like to create a simulation of what would they say to each other. We think that they said to each other, or even generate images of the scenarios or different scenarios that are happening there. So these are all creative venues that you can, go into now with AI, because AI can also generate those images of, those situations in history. Yeah, so this appeals to different types of learning, to people who are maybe visual learners. You can tell them, oh, why don't you create an image and then write about it? Or why don't you tell AI to produce, something, some scenario in history, and then they can visualize it and see it, and then, and that makes them much easier to learn.
Brilliant. And if you could design a dream project, I think you might have touched on this, but if it was a dream project for students anywhere in the world, what would it focus on?
Maybe one of the things that we really need is to know each other much better than we do. And one of the big things that now we can do is we can create a project in which students are communicating with people from another country or from several countries. And now with the ability for translation, you don't even need to know their language. So they can communicate in their language, you can communicate in yours. And you can exchange a lot of ideas that way because things are going to be translated both ways. And it can be such a great experience and a great way to know other people. And I think that eventually that can even help to create peace between nations, because it's different. You treat people differently when you don't know anything about them versus when you learn to know them and you think, wait a minute, they are just me and you, and there's no reason to fight with them, or why are we doing that, or stuff like that. So that could be a great project, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess technology, AI can unite people, can bring people together, and their shared passions. It's all about learning as well. Brilliant.
Yeah,
So learning can bring people together.
of
Miriam,
course.
thank you for sharing your story, your passion. In fact, a very inspiring story, your passion and your incredible insights into the future of project-based learning and AI in education. Your journey and dedication to empowering teachers and students is truly inspiring. To our
Thank you.
listeners, thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Planet Elevate AI podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with someone who cares about the future of learning, like Miriam. I'm Imran Kadri, and this has been Planet Elevate AI. Thank you again, Miriam. And as always, elevating you to success. Thank you.